How does an empire so vast and seemingly eternal simply vanish from the face of the earth? What forces could possibly conspire to bring down such a colossal power? One moment it stands a symbol of unwavering strength and tradition. Its palaces gleam, its armies march, and its influence stretches across continents. The next, it is gone, reduced to rubble and whispers of a forgotten era. The grandeur is replaced by desolation, the order by chaos. This is the story of the Soviet Union, a nation born from the ashes of an empire. It's a tale of immense power, of ideological fervor, and ultimately, of a sudden and unexpected collapse that reverberated around the globe. It began with a revolution, a seismic event that promised to shatter the foundations of the old world, to dismantle the structures of oppression and inequality, a revolution that sought to build a new world from its ashes, a society founded on principles of equality and justice. In early 20th century Russia, the Tsar ruled over a land of stark and often brutal contrasts, a society teetering on the brink of upheaval. Immense, unimaginable wealth and privilege concentrated in the hands of a select few, and grinding, inescapable poverty for the vast majority of its people. World War I, with its unprecedented carnage and devastation, proved to be the final catalyst, the breaking point for a nation already strained to its limits. The nation bled, its resources depleted, its people demoralized. The Tsar, weakened and discredited, fell from power, his authority crumbling under the weight of war and discontent. And from the ruins of the old regime, a new and uncertain future began to take shape. Into this chaos, this vacuum of power, stepped the Bolsheviks, a radical political faction with a clear and unwavering vision. They were led by Vladimir Lenin, a charismatic and ruthless revolutionary who believed in the inevitability of communist revolution. They promised peace, an immediate end to the devastating war that had ravaged the country. Land, the redistribution of land to the peasants who toiled upon it. And bread, an end to the crippling food shortages that plagued the cities. An end to war, land for peasants, food for the starving masses, a promise of a better life for all. Their vision was nothing less than a complete transformation of society, a classless communist society, free from exploitation and inequality, a society where workers, the backbone of the nation, held the true power and controlled their own destiny. In October 1917, seizing upon the widespread discontent and the weakness of the provisional government, they seized their chance. They stormed the Winter Palace, the symbolic heart of the old regime, in a daring and decisive act. And with surprising speed and efficiency, they took control of Russia, ushering in a new era of unprecedented change. The world, watching with a mixture of fear and fascination, would never be the same. The old order was crumbling, and a new force had emerged on the world stage. The dream of a workers' paradise, a society free from oppression and exploitation, had begun, but the path ahead would be fraught with challenges and unforeseen consequences. The Bolsheviks had won, but their grip on power was fragile. Russia plunged into civil war, Reds versus Whites, with millions perishing in the chaos. The Bolsheviks, united and ruthless, used the Cheka to crush dissent and imposed war communism, nationalizing the economy. By 1921 the war was over, but the country was devastated and famine swept the land. Lenin introduced the new economic policy, allowing some private trade to revive the economy. It was a temporary retreat from pure communism, a compromise to let the nation recover. As Lenin's health failed, a power struggle began. Joseph Stalin, the unassuming general secretary, quietly gathered power. He placed allies in key positions, outmaneuvering rivals. As Lenin faded, Stalin was poised to become the new master of the Soviet state. The revolution had survived, but at a steep cost. The seeds of dictatorship had been sown. The Soviet experiment was entering a new, more dangerous phase. The fate of millions would soon rest in Stalin's hands. After Lenin's death, a power vacuum emerged within the Bolshevik Party. The question of who would succeed him loomed large, casting a shadow over the future of the Soviet Union. Stalin, with his cunning political maneuvering and ruthless ambition, emerged as the unchallenged leader. He consolidated his power, skillfully eliminating rivals and establishing himself as the supreme authority. To rapidly transform the agrarian Soviet state into an industrial powerhouse, he launched brutal 5-year plans. These ambitious economic programs aimed to overhaul the entire Soviet economy in a remarkably short period. The goal was to industrialize the Soviet Union at any cost, regardless of the human suffering it might entail. Factories sprung up across the landscape, symbols of a new industrialized Soviet Union. The state, under Stalin's iron fist, set impossible targets. Quotas were established that were often unrealistic and unattainable. These targets became the driving force behind the relentless push for industrialization. Workers were pushed to their limits, enduring harsh conditions and long hours in the name of progress. The human cost of this rapid industrialization was immense. To feed the rapidly growing cities which were swelling with workers drawn from the countryside, Stalin forced peasants onto collective farms, a policy known as collectivization. This meant the end of private land ownership for millions of farmers. The state seized land and livestock, stripping peasants of their livelihoods and traditional way of life. This policy was met with widespread resistance. Resistance was crushed. Any opposition to collectivization was met with brutal force and swift retribution. Millions labeled as kulaks or wealthy peasants were executed, deported, or sent to forced labor camps. The term kulak became a label for anyone who opposed Stalin's policies. Countless others were deported or sent to labor camps, the infamous Gulag system, where they faced inhumane conditions and often perished. The result of collectivization and forced grain requisition was a man-made famine, a catastrophic event that devastated the Soviet countryside. Most infamously, the Holodomor in Ukraine, a deliberate act of starvation that targeted the Ukrainian people. This horrific famine killed millions, leaving an indelible scar on the nation's history. The true scale of the tragedy was hidden from the world for decades. Stalin's rule was built on fear. A climate of constant paranoia and suspicion permeated every aspect of Soviet life. The Great Terror swept the country, a period of intense political repression and purges that targeted anyone perceived as a threat to Stalin's authority. In this atmosphere of fear, anyone could be denounced, accused of being an enemy of the people based on fabricated evidence or personal vendettas. People were arbitrarily arrested, often without cause, and subjected to brutal interrogations or summarily executed. Show trials, elaborate public spectacles designed to eliminate political opponents and instill fear in the population, forced confessions, extracted through torture and psychological manipulation, became a hallmark of Stalin's regime. And the Gulag, a vast network of forced labor camps scattered across the Soviet Union, became tools of control used to silence dissent and eliminate perceived enemies of the state. Yet to the outside world, carefully crafted propaganda painted a different picture. The Soviet Union appeared as a land of progress, a modern, industrialized society on the path to a brighter future. Free education, accessible to all citizens, was touted as a major achievement. Healthcare, provided by the state, was presented as a model for the world, and gender equality, with women playing an active role in the workforce, was promoted as a key tenet of Soviet society. Some in the West, particularly intellectuals and those disillusioned with capitalism, admired this apparent alternative to capitalism, seeing it as a potential solution to the problems of the Great Depression. They were often blind to the hidden cost, unaware of the true extent of the suffering and repression within the Soviet Union. The reality was terror, a pervasive atmosphere of fear and intimidation that stifled freedom and crushed dissent. Famine, a direct consequence of Stalin's policies, ravaged the countryside, leaving millions to starve. And millions sacrificed for Stalin's vision, their lives expendable in the pursuit of a utopian ideal. The Soviet Union was forged in fire, transformed from an agrarian society into an industrial power in a remarkably short time, but it was at a terrible human price, a cost that would continue to haunt the nation for decades to come. The illusion of progress, carefully constructed by Soviet propaganda, masked a society paralyzed by fear, where even the slightest deviation from the party line could have dire consequences. Stalin eliminated rivals and dissent, consolidating his power through purges and political assassinations. This created a brittle, terrorized state where loyalty was enforced through fear and obedience was paramount. The world saw power and progress, a rising superpower capable of challenging the established world order. Inside, the cost was unimaginable, a hidden reality of suffering and oppression that few outsiders could comprehend. The Soviet dream, once a beacon of hope for a better world, was now inseparable from its nightmare, a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked power. The legacy of Stalin would haunt the nation for generations, shaping its political and social landscape for decades to come. The promise of a new dawn, a communist utopia where equality and justice would prevail, had become a reign of terror, a brutal dictatorship that crushed the human spirit. The Soviet Union had changed forever, irrevocably scarred by the terror and transformation of the Stalin era. The year 1953 marked a pivotal moment in Soviet history. The long and often brutal reign of Joseph Stalin had come to an end. His death brought a mix of emotions across the Soviet Union and the world. There was relief, certainly, after decades of fear and repression, but there was also profound uncertainty. The monolithic structure of power that Stalin had built now faced a leadership vacuum. The question on everyone's mind was, who would succeed him, and what direction would the country take? From the ensuing power struggle, Nikita Khrushchev rose to power, a figure who would dramatically reshape the Soviet Union. In a stunning move that reverberated throughout the communist world, Khrushchev delivered his secret speech in 1956, denouncing Stalin's crimes. This bold act marked the beginning of a period known as the Thaw, a time of relative liberalization and openness. Millions were released from the Gulag, the vast network of Soviet prison camps, offering a chance at a new life after years of unjust imprisonment. Censorship eased, allowing for a greater diversity of voices and perspectives in the media. Cultural life revived, with new artistic expressions emerging in literature, theater, and cinema. Khrushchev promised a better life for Soviet citizens, more consumer goods, addressing the shortages that had plagued the Soviet system for decades, better housing, aiming to solve the chronic housing crisis with massive construction projects, and the Soviet Union even launched the space race with the launch of Sputnik, a stunning technological achievement that shocked the world. But his reforms, while significant, had their limits. The limits of the thaw were brutally exposed when he crushed the 1956 Hungarian uprising, demonstrating the Soviet Union's unwillingness to tolerate dissent within its sphere of influence. And his foreign policy decisions, particularly the Cuban Missile Crisis, nearly sparked a nuclear war in Cuba, bringing the world to the brink of destruction. His impulsiveness, coupled with a series of failed policies, particularly in agriculture, ultimately led to his removal from power in 1964. Leonid Brezhnev succeeded him as the leader of the Soviet Union, ushering in what would become known as an era of stagnation, a period of seeming stability, but also of missed opportunities and growing internal problems. The focus shifted away from Khrushchev's reforms and back to stability. Maintaining the status quo became the paramount goal. The party elite, the nomenklatura, enjoyed a life of privilege and comfort, increasingly detached from the realities faced by ordinary citizens. While the economy, though still large, slowed its growth, unable to keep pace with the West. A quiet social contract emerged between the state and the people. The state provided a basic level of security, employment, and social benefits, and in return, people largely refrained from challenging the system or expressing dissent openly. Life became predictable, a routine of work, family, and limited opportunities. But it was also stagnant, lacking the dynamism and innovation that characterized other parts of the world. Innovation withered, stifled by bureaucracy and a lack of incentives. And beneath the surface, cynicism grew, as people became increasingly disillusioned with the promises of the Soviet system. The surface was calm, a facade of stability and order, but the system was rotting from within, plagued by corruption, inefficiency, and a growing disconnect between the rulers and the ruled. The Soviet Union appeared stable and powerful on the world stage, but its foundations were crumbling, weakened by years of neglect and internal contradictions. The seeds of future collapse, though not yet visible to all, were quietly taking root, nurtured by the stagnation and disillusionment of the Brezhnev era. To understand the Soviet Union, we must hear its people. Dissidents like Solzhenitsyn and Sakharov exposed the horrors of repression and became symbols of courage. Most resistance was quieter, shared in kitchens, through jokes, banned books, and whispered doubts. This private dissent eroded faith in the system, creating a deep cynicism that would prove fatal. The Soviet Union saw itself locked in a global struggle with the capitalist West, the Cold War. Proxy wars, espionage, and an arms race split the world in two. Stalin built a buffer zone in Eastern Europe, creating the Iron Curtain. The Cold War justified immense military spending and repression at home. The struggle for global dominance became a struggle for the Soviet Union's own soul. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was in crisis, stagnant, corrupt, and falling behind. Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in 1985, launching Perestroika, restructuring, and Glasnost, openness. He tried to reform the economy and break the party's grip by allowing debate and ending censorship. The truth about the past flooded out and suppressed national movements surged. Gorbachev hoped to save the system, but instead, he weakened its foundations. Eastern Europe broke free, communist regimes fell, and the Berlin Wall came down. Gorbachev refused to use force, letting history take its course. His gamble failed. The system was not reforming, but collapsing. The Soviet Empire unraveled at breathtaking speed. The end was near. As Eastern Europe broke away, the Soviet Union itself began to dissolve. Republics declared independence. Boris Yeltsin emerged as a leader for a new Russia. In 1991, hardliners staged a failed coup. The Communist Party's authority was shattered. By December, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Gorbachev resigned. The red flag was lowered for the last time. The great communist experiment ended, not by invasion, but by collapse from within. The story of the Soviet Union is a lesson in the power and danger of ideas. It shows that systems built on control and fear are ultimately brittle. The shadow of this fallen giant still shapes our world, a cautionary tale of revolution, power, and collapse.